Welcome everyone. This is our final episode of season 2 of the Sparked podcast. It's both a retrospective and a forward-looking piece, and we've got some big names in the studio. Firstly, Amanda Cattermole. She's the CEO of the Australian Digital Health Agency, or the agency as we like to call it. She leads the development, delivery and uptake of digital health to support a connected healthcare system that's accessible to all Australians and embraced by healthcare providers. Next, we've got Simon Cleverly, Assistant Secretary at the Australian Government Department of Health, Disability and Ageing. He has extensive policy, delivery and leadership experience within the health sector and is currently responsible for implementing the Australian Government's Digital Health Blueprint 2023 to 2033. Next, David Hanson, CEO and Research Director in my team in the Australian eHealth Research Centre of CSIRO. With over 150 scientists and engineers, the Australian eHealth Research Centre is CSIRO's digital health research program and a joint venture between the CSIRO and Queensland Health. And last but not least, David Rowlands, Chair of HL7 Australia. He's served on the boards of the Australasian Institute of Digital Health and various aged care and child health service providers. He's a fellow and honorary life member of the Australian Institute of Digital Health, an associate fellow of the Australasian College of Health Service Management and a certified health informatician Australasia. Welcome everyone. This is a little bit of a retrospective and a forward look all at the same time with Sparked. We've got some high-powered folk on the call today. My first question, and maybe I'll go to you, Simon. 2 years on, what have been the biggest achievements? You've had a balcony view these last 2 years. What are your reflections?
3 or 4 really key ones from our first really big achievement from the get-go was the agreement from all states and territories around the country to have all 9 governments participating in Spark from the outset. That gave us a huge acceleration and focus across the country. The second thing that's come about over the course of the last couple of years is the depth and maturity of the conversation that's been happening between clinicians, consumers, informaticians, and some of the discussion that's been had about the consensus approach of Sparked and how challenging that can be, but also that we've created the forum for people to have those in-depth debates and for people to be coming in and having that conversation about being prepared to have their mind changed about a particular topic they're very passionate about. Probably the third one for me is we've gone from scratch, no momentum, to one of the world's most active fire accelerator programs. That's a huge achievement. We know we're getting a lot of people from around the world that are coming and saying, how have we done this? And that's come about through sheer hard work and a real commitment from the community to get in and get involved in the program. And the personal highlight for me in February this year was just being able to attend the Adelaide Sparked event, where we actually started to see vendors using Sparked to move data around the health system. And so really that implementation focus now, it's not just a theoretical concept. We are starting to build these capabilities into clinical systems so we can move data around the system to support patients.
Terrific. Amanda, there's rosy retrospectives. Do you share that kind of enthusiasm looking back?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Brett. I do. It's a great moment to be pausing to look forwards and backwards. As we stand here now, 2 years on, this work, this incredible shared journey seems so critical and necessary. But if you reflect back 2 years ago, this was a pretty ambitious goal. The 4 organisations recognising that we really had to bring this to life. We had to work with the community, stand up something that was going to piece by piece, engagement by engagement, grow standards development and those really critical bodies of work that are going to drive that connected healthcare system that we are working towards together. It's such an incredible moment when you think, as Simon's just described, the richness, the diversity of this community and the momentum that's there. But I do think it's worth reflecting that 2 years ago, that was a goal and a really brave, gutsy goal. And I think these 4 organisations, the engagement we've had together, the steadfast work towards that goal, and that incredible engagement by this community that is now, as Simon says, sort of world leading in its charge, is a pretty powerful thing to be reflecting on together.
Indeed. And David R., as you will now be known, reflecting on those 2 years, we could have focused on all of those profound challenges and kind of stepped back from the fray. Are you equally enthusiastic about the journey that we've taken?
Absolutely. Just to put a slightly different twist on what's already been said, because I wholeheartedly endorse what's been said. Two really important changes that we shouldn't lose sight of are, firstly, the change in culture that we've had. 2 years ago, digital health culture in Australia was almost as fragmented as our health system itself. We had lots of individuals doing lots of things. There was lots of energy, but it wasn't all pulling in the same direction. And the leadership that the Spark partners have shown in changing that culture to a much more collaborative, informed one has been a profound change. The other thing is that the expectation of what you can achieve with standards has grown immensely. In the past in Australia, we have had people saying, look, just implement something and do it this way. And we failed because we haven't invested the time it takes to get people thinking collaboratively, having those rich conversations from different perspectives, investing in the relationships, not only amongst the partners, but amongst the array of community members, etc. All of that takes time, which is why standards does take a bit of time up front. But if you take that time up front, you pick up that time again later, because people are willing to implement, and they do implement as they go, which is why we've been able to see those implementations that Simon was talking about last February.
Fantastic. It is an interesting tension, isn't it, between ensuring that you've got that deep co-design, but being able to move forward with sufficient momentum that people can see that there are exciting changes taking place. I'm a bit of an outsider in the Sparks world, but as I dip in and out, my sense is there's a lot of people who've gotten on the bus. They're really enjoying the ride. They're saying we're leaving town. Everyone else, get on before we've left. David H., what are your reflections?
Really exciting to hear Simon, Amanda and David talk about things from their view. It's worth revisiting a little bit what we've achieved, because it really is huge. But in terms of product, we've actually in 2 years gone from nowhere to having published the Australian clinical data for interoperability and the AU e-requesting data for interoperability, which will merge together. And we've published FHIR implementation guides for the Australian core data set for interoperability, the Australian patient summary, and the Australian e-requesting data for release 1. So to actually have gone from nowhere to, in 2 years, to have published those, what's really exciting, as Simon talked about, was in Adelaide in February, we actually saw these things being used by some of the vendors. And that comes to the strength of the model that we've adopted and changing the culture. So this wasn't a kind of academic exercise of developing the standards and publishing them. We actually had over 1,000 people involved. We had expert hours across our design groups. They really listened to, and what was published, people had real input into it. And so using the FHIR community process for the development, I think we've shown that's worked, and it's been exciting to see. And because we were doing it on the way, the vendors were able to actually build, and we encouraged it. It's part of the process to actually have products being built at the same time. So by the time you're publishing the standard, you've already got implementation happening. That's been a result of all of those hours, 145 meetings, 3 fundamental pieces of work being published. And that true co-design is what changes the culture. We've been able to bring everyone in, get everyone on the same page. Fabulous in terms of actually achieving something so huge in such a short amount of time.
And seeing those vendors with manifest outcomes that are there for all to see and get excited about must be a real lift as well. Now, I will take you all to where your heads were way back when and what you thought and hoped for as the program launched, and what was the best case outcome that you were thinking might be achieved, and where have we landed in relation to that? Can I go to you, Amanda? What did you think we might achieve, and have we hit the mark?
So I think we have. I think we set out to support the rapid momentum and excitement and change in this incredible community. I love David's conversation about the culture. We set out to frame this in a collaborative context. But we also set out really clearly to take this piece by piece. And so it is that balance, and it always was. And I think that's where we have seen exactly the change we were hoping for. We have brought with us an incredible community of innovators across the health sector. As Simon says, our jurisdictional colleagues who are so critical in this work. We've got peaks and colleges. We've got Australian healthcare consumers really critically. We set out to ensure that we were bringing this bottom-up methodology, that we would walk together, but also that this would deliver. Because you do this step by step. You do this with demonstrable change. 2 years on, I think we stand pretty proud, actually, everybody, every single person in this now more than 1,200 diverse community, with having got where we wanted to be. The challenge now is what's next. Now that we have that incredible momentum and change dynamic, it is about continuing to build out piece by piece, and it's also about staying the course. So as I think about some of the other work the agency is doing, and our partners are all in the same position, we must have that same North Star, and we must have it in our sights every time we're looking at our parts of the system. For us, for example, as we build out changed platforms and changed products and services, they squarely drive to this same agenda. They focus on and they use the FHIR standards. They draw on those implementation guides. We stand well now, but the next piece, the next change curve, is possibly the most critical of all.
And now it's time for a fun fact from Kate.
Our first FHIR implementation guide has been balloted and published under the Sparked program, AU Core. This monumental piece of work represents over 6,000 expert hours by you, the Sparked community, through participation in online meetings, in-person events, connect-a-thons and testing events. This is the foundational standard for interoperability across Australia for all use cases, including prescribing and patient summary.
Terrific. Simon, did you think we'd get here?
I was very hopeful, and I think, again, about the concept of a recipe. You've got to have the right ingredients for success. At the outset of the establishment of this program, we really wanted to sort of look at establishing a collaborative, adaptable, human-centred approach to the development of standards in Australia to drive information moving around our system in a much more open and consistent manner. And picking up on Amanda's comment and some of David's earlier comments about culture, it's also about structural change. And Amanda's made a great comment about the fact that this is community-driven. Really, without that, there is no recipe for success. It's important that government plays its role as well. Having the stewardship and the leadership from the top down, which was my earlier comment about states and territories and about the Commonwealth Government. And Amanda's right, we have to stay the course now. In some respect, we've done the easy bit. We've stood this thing up, and we have to now be prepared to drive this forward for the long term. A report a couple of years ago from the OECD pointed out that we have 75% of global fax traffic in the medical services industry. I think back to when we were thinking about standing up the Sparked program and all the other things that are happening in the care economy in totality. Really, that's the problem that we were starting to try and work out how we were going to solve that. We've got a lot of great technology. We've got a lot of great innovators in this country to make sure that we could create this ecosystem where we develop the standards and implement the standards and stay the test of time. So again, from a sustainability perspective, we weren't quite sure how it was going to work, but clearly in 2 years to now have the world's most active FHIR accelerator, and we've got countries around the world going, how have we done that? And you can see some of the ingredients, but some of it's just about the passion and the enthusiasm that we've been able to create as a community to take all of this work forward. So thank you to everybody.
Terrific reflections. David R., what are your reflections, and has anything surprised you on the way?
My reflections are quite similar, I'd have to say. It's hard to imagine much more that Sparked could have achieved in the time frame that we've had. And coming from a late implementer of FHIR basis. Am I surprised? Well, I'm an eternal optimist, and knowing many of the people who have actually made this happen, I'm kind of not surprised that we've gotten where we have. What does excite me is that we have been able to overcome all of the speed bumps that inevitably happen along the way. We make it sound like it's been a really harmonious journey. It's kind of harmonious like a jazz band rather than a symphony orchestra. You've got all sorts of people playing, to my ear, sounds like completely different tunes, and somehow it's all worked. There have been cynics in the room. They've been persuaded to change their approach. I think the thing that excites me most is actually when I walk into any Sparked event and I hear the palpable excitement and I feel the palpable excitement in the room. We are unleashing the creative spirits of all of that community. It's just fascinating and exciting to be a part of. Part of me is a sort of a frustrated sociologist. I'd love to be able to sit down and document this journey.
There are plenty of lessons, aren't there? It's an exemplar of co-design done well, and that's probably transferable to so many other areas that require diverse stakeholders to come together to achieve something. David, you've been up to your chin in Sparked events. What are your reflections on where we've gotten to, and if you've been surprised by anything on the way?
The main thing that's surprised/pleased me is just the scale. We really have gotten everyone involved. And these kind of things are probably easier if you've got 5 people in a room doing it, but they only really work if you've got everyone involved. And to have the breadth of governments involved, and Simon's already mentioned all of the state governments and particularly the Commonwealth Department, their involvement's been fabulous. The clinical community, and we've had a lot of the colleges involved, and we've reached out to NACCHO, etc. And then the vendors, and the vendors have been almost universally there and participating and contributing. And that includes not just the Australian sector, but the international sector as well in terms of the big EMR vendors. Simon talked about earlier the international interest in what we've done. I've been excited that Australia was the second country to have a national fire accelerator after the US's Project Argonaut. I would hope we've done it better because they learned a lot of lessons, and now we've taken their lessons and tried to do it better. We've had lots of interest from other countries saying, how did you do this? Hopefully they learn some of the lessons that we've talked about here and do it better than we've done it as well. Just the scale is the main thing that's really impressed me. We're able to get everyone involved, and that's because of the backing of the governments and the agency and the clinical community.
And you've mentioned NACCHO, the National Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation umbrella body. There must be a lot in the Indigenous health space that requires more data interoperability and connectedness of data. Do you think, looking forward now, that there's a real focus on some of those areas that can flourish with the kind of thing that fire standards and implementation guides can bring to the space?
That's where, looking forward, the innovation side of things is increasing both quality of care and, of course, productivity in the healthcare system is going to be key to having a great healthcare system in Australia. And so whether it's Indigenous or other communities, we've generated a bit of a buzz about what's possible with connected care and connected data, and what's coming out of the Spark program. All 4 organisations had approaches from those clinical bodies and others to say, how do we leverage this to improve this workflow or this clinical service? And Indigenous is one of those areas that CSIRO is working with around improving some of the data collection there. And the whole building on top of these standards and building what are known as Smart on Fire apps using the Spark outcomes, people are starting to get their head around what's possible with that. And so moving forward, that's going to be really exciting.
And Amanda, what next steps in implementation and implementation success look like for you?
Well, Brett, one of the things that is so powerful about where we are is that shared vision and focus at a national level. And I mean that in every sense. That means national bodies, it means governments, it means right across the healthcare sector and the industries. For me, as the agency goes forward in some of the work that we're charged with doing, implementation means making sure that we have in our sights the same North Star in all the steps we take. To the greatest extent possible, we move forward ensuring that we build further connections, we have in our sights all of the different bodies of work, and we try and bring that together to the greatest extent possible. So to give an example, as I think everyone knows, we just released the architecture and roadmap for Health Connect Australia. And that's a big piece too, really looking to that set of national capabilities and standards that are together going to enable that health information sharing at scale in a national context. And so for me, it means making sure that we walk all these pieces together. So as we have that in our sights, it builds on, interconnects with, and then amplifies the work that is being led by Sparked and the standards, the development that is now going on with this incredible momentum and diversity. It also means the policy environment. We're sitting within this incredibly exciting reformist policy environment so that it enables that work. We then build to it and supporting it, and the standards come in to drive that enablement. As we look to at the next iteration of the My Health Record, for example, we do so with FHIR capabilities and standards deeply embedded in that in itself. So we walk forward on the same basis, and then we look to connecting all of those pieces. There's lots of quite intense, clear bodies of work that we have in our purview, but we do them deeply nested within this broader ecosystem and making sure that to the greatest extent possible, every step is another block towards that truly connected, interoperable, safe, dynamic health system that we're driving to together.
Thank you. And David, you've given us an entreaty not to sit on our hands, but to keep going. What do you think's possible here, and what would you like to see flourishing?
What's possible here is a completely different health sector. And we need to look at where Sparked fits in this, and Amanda's put it very nicely. I often use analogies, and I will use the analogy here of Sydney Opera House. So what we've been doing to some extent is putting together a whole lot of standardised tiles, building the tiles, building the ingredients that you build an opera house with. But the program has also allowed people to come together and envisage what that opera house could look like and what could be done with it. And you don't just build it to say, well, there it is, we've done it. You build it so it can actually be used. It's implementation that's actually the important thing. Even though building an opera house is an exciting thing, it's technologically innovative, etc., and even before it's hosted anything, it's a fantastic achievement. And that's where Sparked is now. But we've got to get all of those people coming through and performing in it and doing all of the fantastically innovating things that they do in the opera house. That's what it's all about, and that's what Sparked is all about. It's actually building this edifice that the health sector and citizens of Australia and visitors to Australia can use. Two of the things that we have to do from here on in is we do have to maintain the discipline. We have to realise that you don't just put something in place and there it is, it's done. The Opera House is quite different today to what it was 30 years ago. Might not look that different on the outside, but it sure is different on the inside. It's been completely refurbished, etc. It's never a finished product. You always have to keep the discipline going to keep building it. And we have to invest now in helping people understand how they can innovate in the health system using the edifices that have been created.
Super. Well, to carry on the metaphor, Simon, it's opening night. The crowds are outside in eager anticipation. What's the show look like in the Opera House?
Hopefully we book the orchestra, Brett, because really that's what it's all about. Obviously, once we've got the architecture, we need to be able to use these capabilities and build it in and health information flowing across the system. There was a really good number last year that came out of a Productivity Commission report about better leveraging healthcare and health technologies and the opportunities from a productivity sense around, I think it was $5.4 billion if we could better leverage health technologies, and building from what's already been said about My Health Record on FHIR, about all the things that are happening to build out the architecture is we really want that health information portability around the system. We need to make sure that we are already thinking about how we're going to use these capabilities and tools and services in our system. We've been working on patient summaries. We've been working on chronic condition management, information that we can start to move around the system. We've been starting to work through how do we use data to inform a learning health system for things like a patient encounter within the system. And we're starting to think about the use of patient summaries to capture more rich information about encounters that people have with the health system. And then we're starting to think about, well, in what settings do we want to make sure that that information is captured? And then how does it flow across the system so that when somebody turns up in another part of the system without notice, that encounter information follows them to the next part of their health and wellbeing journey. whilst we are still going to be continuing to focus on building the Opera House, and that's probably going to be a little bit like painting the Sydney Harbour Bridge, we'll probably get to one side and then we'll have to come back to the other again and keep going and keep iterating. We can't lose sight of the fact that actually we are now in a period of time where we're going to have to start thinking a bit more deeply about how we're going to implement some of these sorts of tools. And I think there is an emerging future. David Hanson touched on the fact that of smart forms and what we're doing with Aboriginal health checks, with what we're going to start to try and do with some of those chronic condition plans, and how that links into system reform that's also going to drive our funding reform. So, of course, if we've got better data in the system about patients, about why they're having encounters within the system, then we've got the data there that we can use for public health, for planning, for research, for the innovators to come up with new ways of moving information around the system, for innovators to come up with new treatments and therapies. We think about genomics, we think about all the different use cases, and really the Commonwealth and the states and territories and governments more broadly, our national delivery partners like the agency, like Health Direct Australia, the CSIRO obviously, and Services Australia come in and sort of really back in what it is that we're going to focus on in terms of delivery. And Amanda's point about scale is going to be really critical. How do we do this? How do we provide the right stewardship, but also enough flexibility for the innovators to innovate? And there is an emerging future already. We're starting to talk about electronic clinical decision support. Once we've got the data in the system, how do we start to use the intelligence that we're gathering in these systems at a national scale to be able to inform us about the way that we should be thinking about those system reforms and those funding reforms, and how we capture computable knowledge bases, but not just from a technical perspective. What's the clinical governance that has to sit on top of this to make sure at a national level we've got a national framework that allows local implementation? From an implementation side of things, we're already going to the next step now, and we're starting to talk to the community about how we're going to do this, how we're going to prioritise what the implementations need to be and what the data standardisation work needs to be to support these most important use cases for our health system.
Sounds like a policy accelerator might be required on the side there. David R., tell me about HL7's role in this space.
What HL7 Australia is, and what HL7 International is, a standards development organisation, but the mission and vision of HL7 are all about interoperability, not just about standards. We do see ourselves as bringing expertise and bringing a large community to the Sparked program to engage in standards development, but to engage in it in a way that promotes implementation, as we've talked about earlier in the day. Where to from here? We've grown a lot in the last 2 years as well. We've grown a lot in terms of our relationship with the other partners. We've benefited from some of the momentum that has been built by Spark. We are increasingly moving from an organisation that supplies standards that may or may not be used in the health sector to an organisation that supplies critical infrastructure underpinning health service delivery. And so we need to evolve as an organisation to make sure that we're up to providing that much more critical, much more everyday usage function. So what do we bring? We bring technical capability, we bring people, and we bring some capacity building for the broader Australian fire community.
And great metaphors. Thanks, David. Amanda, I'm sure the agency is also going through an evolution through this period of time, but what does the Australian Digital Health Agency bring in this space?
The development of standards is deeply embedded in the agency's remit, Brett. One of our roles is to provide that leadership and that sort of convening, if you like, across the standards ecosystem. We're charged with that responsibility, which is one of the most exciting parts of our work. And that sort of manifests in a range of ways. One of them, of course, is Australia's National Healthcare Interoperability Plan, which we brought to life a couple of years ago and is now, again, in its sort of second year, really driving interoperability nationally, but of which a critical stream of work is the development of standards. And for us, our involvement with our partners in the Sparked collaboration is one of the key ways in which we're supporting and stewarding together the delivery of that standards implementation work to support the connected healthcare system and to give life to one of the most critical roles that we play as an agency, really aligning at a national level so that we can pass information around in a meaningful way, have it in the hands of clinicians at the point of care, bring it in so critically into the hands of Australians and empower them in their healthcare journeys.
And now it's time for a fun fact from Kate.
Over 800 people have downloaded the Sparked podcast Season 1. Have you listened yet?
Fantastic. Thank you. David, I think I know what CSIRO is doing, but what do you want to tell our listeners?
We've been super excited to coordinate the Spark program in conjunction with the department, the agency, and HL7 Australia. It really fulfills CSIRO's role as a national science agency, as well as a community builder, bringing the community together across technology and technology providers, as well as, in our case, in CSIRO Health and Biosecurity, the health and clinical world. So that's been really exciting. Our role then is to build on these standards, and there is so much happening in technology across society. And if we think in particular about what's happening with artificial intelligence these days and generative AI, on top of the more traditional machine learning type of AI, which we've been doing for 20 years, these technologies are now being understood by the wider community, what's possible, by governments of what's possible in terms of productivity and efficiency. These standards really provide a lot of other research that we're doing across CSIRO Health and Biosecurity and the Australian Health Research Centre to make a real difference on top of the standards which we're helping to implement into the healthcare system.
Thanks, David. And last but not least, Simon, it's not just the digital health branch, it's the Commonwealth's effort overall, and there are so many intersecting pieces there and so many transformations that are going to happen across the Department of Health and elsewhere. What are your reflections on the role of the Commonwealth in this very big space?
The one-line answer would be a laser focus on patients and patient outcomes. We think about the department's motto around better health, aged care outcomes and wellbeing outcomes for all Australians. We've now got disability recently brought into the portfolio through the machinery of government changes post the last election, which really gives us now a whole of digital economy lens to how we're thinking about supporting people as they get on and live their lives, and how information generated about them in the health system, in the disability sector, within the aged care ecosystem that they need to live their best life and to contribute to society. And really, our role is about having that laser focus on patients. Our digital health blueprint really sort of puts it into three categories. Firstly, patient first, but making sure, building on Amanda's comment, that we also need to make sure that clinicians also have much better information about patients so they can provide a much more joined up, informed set of opinions about the treatments and services that patients need to get on and live their lives. And of course, learning health systems. If we're creating and standardising and able to move this data around in an interoperable way across the ecosystem, then of course that's going to give us those great insights and really allow us to make sure that we're using the smart tools. We are a productive country. We can start to be at the forefront of things like artificial intelligence and how we use data to help support getting better outcomes for Australians. Also, from a funding perspective, from a practical perspective, the Commonwealth has invested another $6.3 million in 25-26 to continue the operations of the Spark program. That's a further down payment onto the evolving future for the Spark program as we kick into what I see as a BAU model. And of course, later this year, we will also be looking to release a standards roadmap that's being developed with all of the partners involved in Spark and insights from the community to make sure that we do provide the right guardrails so that people know where we're going to go next and what the focus is, and so that we can make sure that we can articulate the priorities of government. To your point about the fact the Commonwealth's a big organisation, there's 7,500 staff just in the Department of Health alone at the Commonwealth level. We've got 8 states and territories, and of course all the work. We're really going to bring that stewardship and that leadership to make sure that we have a laser focus on patients and on the priorities of government.
Wonderful wrap. Thanks everyone for your time and your inputs. All right, well, that's a wrap for Season 2 of the Sparked podcast. If you're interested in looking back on Season 1, the links are in the show notes. And if you want to see a lot of the detail of what we've talked about today and the whole story of Sparked, the Sparked book is also out, also accessible via the show notes. Thanks, everyone.
What's been added to the Fire playlist are now on high rotation. The Spark by Cabin Crew. Get listening to the tunes that will fire you up on Spotify.
The Sparked podcast is brought to you by the Australian Federal Department of Health and Aged Care, CSIRO's Australian eHealth Research Centre, HL7 Australia, and the Australian Digital Health Agency. You can join the community by heading to sparked.csiro.au. And don't forget to join us on LinkedIn at SparkedAU. This show is hosted by me, Brett Sutton, Director of Health and Biosecurity at CSIRO, and produced by Ed Studios' Janine Hamer and Lucy Ratz, and CSIRO's Dr. Naomi Stecklenburg. Sound by Hayley Dell.